Stereotypical San Francisco. Let's talk about stereotypical New York for a second. I don't know if you've seen this story. This guy was basically smoking a cigarette on the train. This guy is on the train. There's another guy with his daughter on the train. He asked him to turn out the cigarette, and then the guy threatens to stab him. Now they're looking for him apparently. Anyway, I was going through the comments on this because this brought back some fucking memories for me and a conflict in my head. And I don't know what to do about it, I guess, kind of. Because I used to smoke on the fucking train all the time in New York. It's actually the only reason I know what those little police stations, the little precincts inside the subway stations look like, is from fucking smoking on the train. It's one of those things. And it's, when somebody's smoking on the train, realistically, there's a lot of, it's like this thing, right? So like, as a father, I know exactly the feeling of, I'm gonna fucking stand up and I'm gonna say something. You know what I mean? There's guys smoking on the train. He's not supposed to be smoking on the train. From what I can see, there's plenty of other fucking seats. It would have been better just to move. Realistically, it would have just been better to move. But I could also very much understand the thought of, this is fucking wrong. I'm standing here with my daughter. I'm gonna fucking do something about it, right? But I also know what it's like to be in the mentality of being like, yo, I'm about to fucking smoke a cigarette right here on the train. You know what I mean? And none of that equals, yo, somebody fucking should talk to me. You know what I mean? Like, that's just really what it comes down to. So there's this weird thing because I saw people in the comments being like, yo, like somebody was like, you could go ahead and be Mr. Cigarette Police, but like realistically it's just not fucking worth it. You know what I mean? And it made me fucking think about, so in fucking Cuba, right? They're already starting to fucking vaccinate the kids, fucking as young as 2 years old, yo. And it really threw me the fuck off, right? Because I have said it with pride. I've tried to be like, yo, Cuba supposedly has the best medical system. I was there, apparently not the best, realistically. I didn't need medical care, but one of the people I was traveling with did, and they weren't particularly happy with the medical care system there. I could tell you here in San Francisco, while I can't say anything about the care that I received as far as my congestive heart failure, I can see I'm experiencing a huge amount of waste, at the very least, of money by having universal health care the way they have it. It allows fraud. And it's one of these situations where it's like, I can imagine it being like that in Cuba, where it's like, wow, I just received a really great healthcare, right? So I got nothing to complain about, but at the same time, there's other components that are actually kind of fucked up with it, right? Anyway, kind of really specific with this kid shit with the Cuba thing, right? To me, it feels as if it's kind of similarly to the attitude of the father on the train that was like, this guy smoking a cigarette, and I'm gonna do whatever I possibly can. I'm not gonna take any risk for my child, right? You get what I'm saying? Is I'm not going to take any risk that my child could be harmed. I don't want my child to live in any world where something that I could prevent bad happening to them happened. I can understand that fucking attitude, right? But at the same time, I also know, so what I'm saying, like, it brought this conflict in my head. I also know that that's just silly. And a lot of times when you're in that kind of mindset of as a parent of like, yo, I want this world to be completely perfect and there's nothing ever bad to happen with them, you're not being realistic, and you're being kind of like authoritarianism, whatever, and dictator, whatever. Like, it's just not, the balance is off, yo. And like, is this weird thing where ironically Cuba deciding to vaccinate children at this point in time, considering all the data that I've seen right now, has made me think, why the fuck are we vaccinating here in the United States? It doesn't make sense. Like, it's a lot. It's weird. We're like aligning a lot with authoritative and like communist and just very, very, in a lot of ways anti-American ideals, and they really are kind of happening little by little. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. It's just fucking odd. It's just fucking odd that the smoking on the train thing made me think about like just kind of life in general, because it's funny how life goes. I used to be a person who used to break rules all the time. And then I think it's the stereotypical. Then I got older. And then I wanted to live in a world where rules like that, where basically you had the right to be like, even if it was just you alone on the train with, you and your daughter and somebody else smokes, that you should have the right to be like, yo, fuck that. You're not supposed to be smoking in here. You can't do that. But at the same time, that's so ignorant. You know what I mean? Because it's like, yo, even though I can see myself doing that even with the knowledge I have, but the knowledge I have is, if somebody's doing that, leave them the fuck alone. If you can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's different if the car was like, full and like there was nothing you can do and it's really, really imposing, sure. But that's a very different situation. Like, yeah, he's imposing. You know what I'm saying? Like, he knows he shouldn't be smoking. There's other people in the car, whatever. But it's also, the train's fairly and fucking empty. And what the fuck? You know what I mean? Because I understand that attitude of like, now you're infringing on my rights. You know what I'm saying? Because like, realistically, this is what's coming down to. That guy, the guy who ended up threatening those motherfuckers, the father and daughter for telling him to stop smoking, what it really does come down to is, at that moment, he has every right to. Yes, there's signs and there's laws and everything else. But at that particular moment in time, it really does come down to who's going to stop me. And then if you're going to end up being the guy who's going to stop me, it's like, yo, so you're going to become the cop right there? Like, that's like being like, so you're going to take your daughter to work with you? You expect cops to be fucking walking around with their children? As a matter of fact, I bet the world would be mad different if cops had to walk around and had their children by their side as they were arresting somebody or approaching somebody. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? It just doesn't fucking make any sense. But then it also feels as if, like, for me, the biggest thing with this, and I kind of want to hear more about this because it is what it is. The data's out there, but I haven't heard it more defined. But basically, what it comes down to is, from my understanding, from what the reporting is, at all fucking points in time, for the people who have had COVID and have recovered from it, there's a certain amount of people. I think it was like 30%. Maybe the percentage is off, but I heard 30% of those people they don't have long-term antibodies. In other words, like, basically they get COVID, their body fights it off, and then their body doesn't say, yo, I'm gonna hold on to this information. It says, fuck it, if COVID comes around again, I'm gonna just kind of act as if I never had COVID, and basically, I guess, because I've been able to beat it before, I'll beat it again. But it's better if I don't think it's the same fucking COVID, because it's not probably gonna be the same COVID. That's me. That's an opinion right there. That second part right there. The reason for the virus to maybe for the body's immune system to maybe not want to hold on to antibodies, even though those are the antibodies that were able to conquer a virus that the body went through or was conquered. One of the reasons would be for that. It's kind of like, you'll probably have a better chance of fighting that next time if you don't follow previous instructions, which is kind of why I understand, and the data seems to be indicating a certain amount of hesitation for this. The thing is, I'm not against vaccines. I'm definitely not against an mRNA vaccine necessarily, but it doesn't seem necessarily for this particular type of virus, simply because of the type of virus it is. It may not be the best thing, because if the data is correct from what I've seen, in which it is, there's a certain percentage, and if it's something, even up to 30%, that's fairly high. But I would say, even if it was even anywhere in the 5 to 10% range, it's something to at least think about and consider, because if there are people that are getting COVID, fighting it off, and then later on they're not holding on to those antibodies, that means their body for some reason has said, and if you're going by the instructions, their body, who was able to successfully take care of it one time, to conquer COVID one time, said, I don't need to hold on to those instructions. But what an mRNA vaccine is saying, yeah, you do. As a matter of fact, here are the specific instructions. And so, it's telling, an mRNA vaccine is mostly telling the immune system, hey, these are the specific instructions you should follow for this particular vaccine. Not necessarily, again, this is all, shady tree biology up to a certain point, but not necessarily with a live vaccine, where a live vaccine is kind of saying, hey body, here's the vaccine, you kind of figure out how you can, how to fight this. mRNA vaccine is kind of saying, hey, buddy, here's we already know how to fight this. Here's the instructions. It does seem as if that may be incorrect. And for me, one of the things that concerns me with the Cuba thing is like when you're doing that at a very early age, it's just, there's definitely different kind of questions as far as like, because, obviously the antibody, how long is that really going to last? That's, it's not supposed to, that's not, it shouldn't be lifelong, but there are some, there are lifelong effects to certain illnesses received at certain times in life. So there could be negative lifelong impacts where the risk is just not even necessarily worth it. I don't want children dying. I want people dying, period. But that's a lot of risk for the amount of data that we have. And then it's just, it's like, it's where I'm at right now, where it's like, I saw this fucking poster this morning. It was like something like 600 something deaths in San Francisco, or 700 from overdosing, and then it was like something like 600 or so from fucking COVID. So at least in this particular city, you actually have a greater chance of dying from a fucking overdose than from COVID. That's pretty intense. To then say that you have to fucking, you're requiring or mandating a vaccine. I want to say that I have seen a shift. There have been more people understanding and actually using correctly the differences between mandate and requirement in the media. Because they are very, 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 very different things. Like a requirement, if you kind of want to have an example of it, these birds are required to eat just like we're required to eat in order to live. It doesn't matter what it is that we're eating necessarily, but we are required to eat in order to live. But a mandate says you have to eat this type of specific food. In other words, a mandate does not care about what is required in order to do something. It just simply says you have to do it. It's kind of like if you had a child as well, the child is required to eat dinner. That's a pretty normal requirement that you have in your home, right? But if you mandate and the child has to eat every single thing on the plate, that's a mandate. It's not what's required to live. It's not what's required even for you to take care of that child. You're just mandating that because you came up with it out of nowhere. And so you have to be very careful using the words requirement and mandate, because many of us have had requirements that we've had to fulfill throughout our life, including vaccine requirements. But I don't believe any of us have had any mandated vaccines. And that's a very different thing. And so it's a little wordplay that was going on that there is less of now. But there's still a lot of people that are kind of confused and don't understand the difference between what the word mandate means and what the word requirement means, and that they are not interchangeable. One basically says the other one doesn't matter. A mandate says we don't give a fuck what the requirements are. We're just simply saying this. While a requirement is, hey, this is what's required. You know what I mean? Like you're required to have a certain amount of driving or flying hours before you can become a pilot. You're required to pass a driving test. That's a different thing than maybe in your house you're mandated to receive a certain grade point average or do a certain task before you're allowed to, go get your license or whatever. That becomes complicated because then, do they have the legal right to? Depends on the state, I would imagine. In other words, like, does a person who is otherwise qualified to receive a license, but who is underage or is a minor or in the care of someone else, would they necessarily have the right? I believe they would, to obtain a driver's license, even if their parents are against it. They should. But that's what I'm saying. That's the difference between a mandate and a requirement. Like, mandates are normally kind of ridiculous. They're usually the way they come from, or the history of them, is basically a king's mandate. It's the king saying, I got this from fucking God, and God said I'm gonna fucking do this, so now you gotta do that. You know what I mean? There rarely have ever been justified. And so it's very, I hate, I don't like going down this kind of rabbit hole, but it is concerning whenever you have a politician in the United States, at the very least, who is using the word and trying to impose mandates, because very realistically, the United States was started by a bunch of people who came from countries that had mandates and knew that those were ridiculous to try to impose or enact. So anyway, this shit got me down memory fucking lane. Fucking smoke on the train, and that that whole fucking thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, Anyway, weird shit about Cuba imposing, mandating these, because that in Cuba would be mandated, kids as young as 2 years old for this vaccine. And as if you can see here in the United States, where we just, the FDA themselves just said no to the booster shots, because if you listen to the actual experts and the scientific data, there's reasons to be concerned, at the very least, to not mandate. People want to take their own risk. They want to take their own risk, but it's not necessarily. It's just not. I know it sounds fucking whatever to certain people, but when you really look at the data, it's not necessarily about the fucking hospitalizations and deaths, and so therefore, the mandate and the requirement doesn't seem appropriate. It's almost like saying it's getting closer and closer to saying that you would mandate the regular seasonal flu vaccine, and that's something that people have talked about, and it was already kind of decided and known that would be ridiculous and unethical and improper. And with this vaccine, it's getting very close to it. It's not. I'm not gonna be realistic. I mean, I'm not gonna be crazy about it. I will be realistic on it. It's not. There's a lot of differences, but it's getting closer to the point where it definitely doesn't seem. Nothing indicates it should be mandated, and required even. It becomes a little more questionable as more is known and we're experiencing what this is like. It is not about blame, but then it does become a point where it's better to correct now than I'm probably using this incorrectly, but kind of tucking our tails between our legs and acting as if there's nothing wrong. And the fact is, new data is new data. It may contradict and conflict what was thought of, but that's better than fucking I tell you what, the mother of my child, she always mentioned that her grandmother, and I still don't fucking remember exactly which one of the two, that she either got polio when she was younger or she never got the polio vaccine. Something fucking happened with the polio thing. And I just remember that so many people have been affected with it. I remember my great-grandparent was very kind of into it too, as far as having seemingly some trauma or whatever. But this isn't polio. And it's unfair as a virus and as a disease and as a pandemic, it's unfair to try to compare the two. I'm not going to kind of even try to compare it to something else, but looking at what this is starting to look more and more as if it may just simply be that the approach or some of the approaches have been improper, and it can have long-term negative effects to not want to simply omit that and change course rather than dig our heels in, especially just kind of when you look at what's happening. I find it just very odd how there would be people here in the United States that would be aligned with doing with what is now currently being done in Cuba, and it feels as if I know there has to be a certain amount of delusion to not be able to realize that and understand that. Anyway.